everybody. Thanks for being here for the press conference that we have each Wednesday after a council meeting. I apologize that we had to start a little earlier today to accommodate my ever-changing schedule. I want to go over some highlights from last night's council meeting and then take any questions that you might have here with the press or if anybody sends anything online. One of the things that we announced at the beginning, and I want to say it again and say a special thank you because on Wednesday of next week, the council and I will have a Christmas celebration for all the employees, and John Bean and Sweet Peppers Deli has been gracious enough to donate all the luncheon food for that event, food and drink at no cost. As y'all know, the city is not able by law to spend money on employees like that, so we're grateful, very grateful to them for that, because I know it'll be an hour lunch that our employees will greatly enjoy. We also had a donation from Lowe's. Tom Barrington at Lowe's, the manager, donated a 9-foot Hayden pine artificial tree, pre-lit, as a matter of fact, to City Hall, so that we can have some Christmas decoration inside the City Hall. And we've asked Miss Patty Bartley's class at Cook Elementary to help with decorations, and we hope to make that a tradition each year and ask different classes within our school system. So I wanted to say thank you again to those folks who are supporting the city. We also announced, and this is important, and I hope people will take time to take a look at it, that the Probst Park Master Plan Survey is now available. At the November the 2nd, 2021 council meeting, the council voted to hire Neil Schaefer to review the Park and Recreation Department's original master plan, and only to update to today's standards and not to exceed $15,000 in the process. We also decided we would solicit community input because that's critical. You're welcome to reach out to me or any of the council members to talk to us about it, but we encourage you to go to the mayor's Facebook page to see the survey. And Joe, will it also be on the website?
Yes, sir.
It'll also be on the City Hall's website, so that you can go in and put in your information. The survey will be available until January the 7th, so please take advantage of that. Part of the important information that I wanted to share from last night's meeting is that the council did vote 4-2 to not move forward on the proposed raises for hourly wage employees. We looked at what it could potentially cost if we added the 12 department heads into that. And we were hoping for a different outcome on the numbers, but the numbers simply were too high for us to be able to move forward at this time. I announced last night during the meeting that Mark Alexander, Mike Burnson, and Pat Mitchell worked diligently on pulling the numbers together. At our work session last Friday, interim COO Mark Alexander Jr. gave a detailed report on the numbers. This has been reported in the media as well. And the determination was this, that it appears that the books, our accounting records, have not been correctly reconciled to the bank accounts for an undetermined period of time. This means that the information in the books may not agree with the actual past expenditures and revenues for the bank accounts. So until we get a good handle on exactly where our finances are, the council voted last night to wait until we have a permanent CFO or COO in place that can help us really dig in and determine, get this information accurate, and so we can determine when is the best time to move forward. It's also because the amount, if we had gone with raises for the entire employees across the board, that would have been $671,620.68, which was not budgeted for this year. And we also have to be careful about making changes to the budget like that when our audits come through again. So the other topic, and again, I want to say this too, I said it last night, I want to say it again. The council and I are committed to doing everything we can to support our employees and to get the salaries up to a competitive level with other municipalities and counties in the area and across the state. It's important that we also reward the employees that are doing exceptional work for the city. Many have gone many years without raises. Many, if you look at the numbers, we are paying below what is happening in other municipalities our size, and we are determined to change that. However, it would not be prudent for us to do that until we have a clear accounting of the numbers here. That's, in my opinion, is being good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars, and also being careful to make sure that our employees are being treated fairly and, quite frankly, are able to meet payroll. You never want to get yourself into a situation where you're guessing about your finances. That's just not smart or healthy for anybody. So I applaud the council for their decision last night, and I want to remind, and I also understand why the council is so adamant about trying to find ways to do this. The other area that they talked about was maybe looking into the reserves that we have for insurance and for the city, and we are not quite sure exactly where that stands as far as the total, the amount in those accounts. And so, but it's also important to remember that you have those reserves for a reason, and that's one-time money, and dipping into that to give raises, again, as mayor, I think is not the best, being the best stewards of the money that we have. And we always have to do that as we're moving forward with the city. So also, the council went into executive session last night to discuss a matter with an employee. We are going to, they voted to, George Irby, the longtime city employee, is going to go, he's been working part-time for several years now, probably, how many years now has George been part-time?
3 or 4.
3 or 4 years. And so for 6 months, he's going to come back to the city full-time in anticipation of an employee in his department that will be retiring in January. We have a $467,000 housing grant from the Mississippi Home Corporation that we have decided to bring to let Mr. Irby start working full-time for at least 6 months. He can't do it longer than that because of PERS guidelines, to make sure that we stay on top of this grant. And then once there's a retirement happening in January, as I mentioned, we will then move forward in trying to fill that position. The other issue that came up in executive session has to do with FEMA grant that we would be getting reimbursement for the projects that we've worked on in the city, such as the Sim Scott project, gathering the information for our audit. As we've mentioned before, our 2020 audit, we had hoped to have everything turned in by now so that our audit would be ready by the deadline of December the 31st, and that is not going to happen. Part of the reason was trying to gather the information that we needed to submit for the FEMA grant. As we were going through the documents, we became concerned about, with the preliminary review, it looked as if we may be in violation of state legal compliance in the bidding process. Now, so what we did was we looked at this with our accountants from Watkins, Ward, and Stafford. City attorney was in the room. Joe Dillon, who was in charge of the FEMA grants, was in the room. And after hearing that and seeing the information and knowing that that would be cited in our audit, I decided to go ahead and submit that information to the state auditor to look into it for us. At this point, that's all we're doing, is having them look into the process. It seemed suspicious. It seemed like we had skipped some of the processes that may have needed to happen. In executive session last night, we discussed this with the council. We looked at it thoroughly. We had several people that had worked in the project give us some information. Again, we're not pointing fingers at anybody or any direct accusations. We're just trying to find out to make sure the city's following all the protocols. But the council did vote last night to not include Scott in FEMA reimbursement. And now I want to ask if our attorney, Jeff Turnage, would like to comment on that any further, and he might can give a clear explanation.
Mr. Mayor, are you going to be able to comment on that at all too, or you want to leave that? Or are you going to be able to further comment at all on the FEMA
Sure.
issue?
I'm just going to let Jeff make some comments now, and then I'll be available.
Cool.
I'll be right back.
Okay, so I don't know exactly all the money that was involved arising out of the 2019 tornado, but most of it has already been reimbursed. And the part that made Scott unique was that we had insurance coverage that covered some of the damaged property there. And Joe Dillon here was responsible for making the FEMA application, so he may correct me if I misspeak, but our approved amount of total damage for the Scott property, the park and the building, was $1.036 million. Of that, we had approximately $740,000 paid to us by Travelers for insurance. That left $285,000 in round numbers for us to get reimbursement from FEMA for if we spent all of that money in Scott Park restoring the property that was damaged. As it turns out, of that $280-some-odd thousand, we'd get 87.5%, which FEMA reimburses 75%, and then MEMA would give us 12.5%, and we'd be responsible for the other 12.5%. So what we really had in play is about $250,000. What we learned last night during executive session was that the building came in at an approximate cost of $550-something thousand, and the city spent the rest on other things in other locations, like a pavilion at Southside, I remember being said last night. I don't remember the other items, but they spent it around the city on other park needs, and as a consequence of that, it sort of made it iffy at best to apply for FEMA to get that other $258,000 or so that we could have gotten. And so rather than submit and then have it paid and then maybe clawed back or denied and a bunch of questions asked, the council, I think, rightly decided to just walk away from the FEMA application and allow that money to be used by some other governmental entity who also had an emergency need. Pretty much it.
So just to clarify, so I understand. So that money that was spent on other other park needs that weren't necessarily storm related? Is that?
That's right. And of course, the two buildings that were in Simscott were completely demolished. So we got, when you have a total loss like that, the insurance company gives you a check for what that is. There's no legal requirement that the city use that money at Simscott Park. However, when they elected to spend it elsewhere, it's pretty much disqualified the city from getting that money from FEMA. But yeah, as far as I understand, it was legally expended. It just it wasn't for storm-related damage, as I understand it. It was for things that had been, needed for quite a while, but wasn't storm damage.
Gotcha. And that was insurance money, correct? That was
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Money being fungible, I guess you could say it's insurance money,
okay.
Or it may have been some other money, but I believe it was insurance money spent that way.
How much remaining FEMA reimbursement money, I guess, is still out there that could be applied for? I know you said the majority was already.
I'm going to say nothing. I think we've recovered every dime from all the storm-related damage, the debris pickup, and all of that.
We have two small projects.
All right, go ahead, Joe.
We have two small projects, we're still submitting paperwork on. One is the Riverwalk and one is the amphitheater. The projects have been completed, but what's happening is FEMA's asking for more information that we didn't know about at the time. In particular, we're having to prove that with the amphitheater and with the Riverwalk, that when it flooded, that we didn't push the silt and the mud and the sticks back into the river. Even though they came out of the river, it's illegal for us to push them back in, and we did not push them back in. So what we've done is we've applied for a clean water permit from the Corps of Engineers in Mobile, and we're proving to them that we didn't pollute the river with anything, with sand or silt. And so we're waiting on the Corps of Engineers to give us that clean water permit, and then that part will be done too.
How much what's the dollar amount?
Those two added together are probably about $90,000 total. We won't need all of it, but what we're trying to recover is the labor, where we used city workers to clean the debris. Because you remember the Riverwalk was a mess. Mm-hmm. And so after that, since they declared it a disaster, we're able to claim that. We also rented some equipment from a local company, skid steers and stuff like that. So we're working that. And then at the amphitheater, the electrical connections over there, the electrical panels were underwater, and they agreed to pay for all of that. And then we had a lift station, a sewer lift station that was damaged, and they've agreed to pay for all that too. But it's all contingent upon this one clean water permit. And at the time, we didn't document that we weren't pushing it in because that wasn't a requirement at the time. So we've got sworn statements from all of our, sworn affidavits from all of our employees, and we're trying to prove a negative, which is difficult, but we're very close on it.
Gotcha. Is there any concern that with these projects, this FEMA process, that the issues with the Simscott Park application might impact at all, or maybe the opposite?
It's just the opposite. Since we were concerned, since we had a concern, since we went to them and said, we've got this concern, let us explain it to you and let's do that, then it has just the opposite. They trust us. I'm not going to say they trust us more, but they know that we're being above board on all of it, and we're trying to explain it all. But to also keep in mind too, we've received already $580,000 approximately in payments that's already in the bank, and so we satisfied those, and we've talked to FEMA and to MEMA, and withdrawing from these two projects will have no effect on the others that are out there. You're allowed to do that. And the reason that FEMA and MEMA approved it for that was because at the time they were doing their surveys, we didn't know what our insurance would pay. And so the way the FEMA system works is you use your insurance money first, and then they go above the insurance proceeds with allowable expenses. So, and out of all of our projects with the tornado, the Scott was the only thing that had insurance, because we didn't have insurance for storm damage, we didn't have insurance for silt on the Riverwalk and stuff like that too. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
So what were Mayor, you said there were some questions about the bidding. Can you get into that?
I was gonna,
Yes. When we were looking at, this is part of the issue. We should not be late turning this information in. We should not have been late on our audit. So that was a red flag to me when I came into office and we were beginning to try to pull this information together. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that there was anything illegal happening. It basically was telling me that we just did not have the procedures in place internally to make sure this was happening, going at an organized rate that it should. We should never be late on an audit. When we're working on projects like this, we should be able to easily pull receipts. We should be able to easily pull bids. It should be easy to pull all this information together. And so what I've been doing since this has been going on, working with Joe and others, is to find out, what was our policies and our procedures. And as we were getting close to trying to get this done by November the 15th, we kept having stumbling blocks in gathering the information. And so when Joe was going through the receipts that we were finally able to pull, we saw some concerns there on the bidding process. And so that's when, as I mentioned before, we called the meeting with Jeff, and Wanda Holly was there from Watkins Ward and Stafford, and two of the folks that work for her that have a lot of experience in FEMA reimbursements. And when we were looking at the information, it at the surface looked, I don't know if suspicious is the right word, but it looked like we may not have been following proper procedures. And so I made the decision to call the auditor's office that day. I'm going to do that anytime I find something throughout my tenure. It is important that we do this stuff correctly. Being late on your audit like this affects the city's ability to be prepared for grant money that we desperately need. I'm not going to wait for an audit finding if I hear or see something that is, it looks like it wasn't happening the proper way. Now again, let me say this loud and clear, when you turn this over to the state auditor, this is for them to determine whether that is the case. Everything may have been fine, but it was enough from what we had at the time that our accountants told us that it looked like that was going to be a sighting in this, with the potential of turning this in for FEMA, that could have been another issue with the federal government. So that's why we sent this to the state auditor's office, and then made the council aware of it, because they had to vote to not. They voted to have Joe in place to do the FEMA work. So in order for us not to turn it in, they needed to see this information and make that vote, and that's what they did last night, and it was unanimous. Now, what I'll be happy to share with you, give to you here, is a letter that I received and the council has this, and they were able to see this and look at this before any decisions were made last night. But out of the, being transparent, when it was determined that we could not have all our information in time for them to complete our audit, and they were all already pointing out issues that we were going to be cited for. Y'all heard me mention that we could have more sightings this time than we did even in the audit where we had embezzlement going on. I asked Ms. Holly to send me a memo outlining the particular issues that we might be facing or that would be cited in this coming up audit, because we are in the process now of trying to, we're working on an MDOT grant that we would like to get, and we're in the final stages of that, and we've got to be able to explain and document to them what we're doing to make sure we have our finances in order. So that's why I asked her to prepare this for us, and we're going to continue to work hard on behalf of the city to, as you know, we were talking about our budget issues earlier, so these grants are critical. And one of the things I ran on was the fact that I wanted us to be more aggressive in bringing in grants to the city. And if we're going to do that, we have to have our financial house in order. Did I answer your question?
Well, can you say what specifically you think was or wasn't done correctly with the bid process?
Well, what it looked like to us, and Jeff, you help me with this, because I want to get it right, was that when your projects like this, you either have to go out on bid or ask for quotes. And from what we could see at the time, it looked as if that might not have occurred properly. So that would have been the quotes for the Simscott building, is that correct?
Yeah,
That's right.
I can elaborate if you want.
Yeah, I'm gonna let Jeff elaborate on that a little bit. And this was what we were seeing from the receipts that we had and the totals that Joe was totaling up. Yes.
Yeah, but before I got a couple quick questions for you before you bring
Okay,
sure. Jeff up, so we can.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
What are the questions?
So, one, you mentioned the going over the process. Do you feel fairly comfortable and confident that the city council is all on the same page as of this moment about the proper procedures and protocols for a project, going through something like this Simscott Park proposal, getting these RFPs together and documented and all that? Where do you feel about everyone kind of being of one mind on that in terms of the process?
Well, I mean, I think we are of one mind on this. Obviously, I'm dealing with this every day and seeing things at a time maybe that they're not aware of as we're working through this. But I would say that the unanimous vote last night to not move forward with that FEMA is a good sign that everybody's on the same page with this. The fact that they voted to not move forward with the raises until we had a COO or CFO in place to help us determine actually where our finances are, I would say, is a statement to the fact that we're on the same page. Everybody looks at these things differently. I am, I just have a strong desire to make sure that we're the best stewards we can be of the citizens' dollars. And so that's why I'm trying to make sure that the council has all the information that they need to make wise decisions. So the long answer to a short question is yes, I think we are.
And I heard, I think it was during the raise discussion, but it applies to this as well. One of the members of the city council kind of renewing that call for that forensic audit that you had asked for. I mean, do you think this illustrates the need for that? I know you said this.
Oh, of course I do. I mean, I'm of a strong opinion that we need a forensic audit to make sure that we know exactly where we are. Again, I want to emphasize too that that's because that can become a political issue if it's not stated or talked about correctly. This is not trying to point a finger at anybody or any administration. As I mentioned before, the city had an embezzlement in the administration prior to the last one when Mayor Rupp was in. There was also an embezzlement there. So I think anytime you've had issues like that, I think it's wise for cities or municipalities to periodically do a forensic audit, just because the finances of a municipality like this are very complex. And we've had quite a few people in the CFO position over the years. And for me, someone who, and this is not this is not a company, this is not our, this is the city's money. And I think that there's been, you know, a significant outcry in the community for forensic audit. So yes, I'm definitely interested in trying to find a way to make that happen.
And then the last question I would ask you last night about when you think that deadline might be, or that timeline for when that decision from the state auditor's office might come down. Any
I have no idea. I contacted them late Friday evening, and then they reached out to me just to confirm that they had received it Monday, and I've not had any conversation with anybody about that since.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so as to the specifics that triggered the mayor's report to state audit, we had a spreadsheet delivered to us by Mr. Dillon when he finally got the invoices for a lot of the Scott Community Center contract work. And what seemed suspicious, just looking at this spreadsheet without knowing all the details, was you ended up with one contractor doing 9 different components of the project, many of them separated by just a couple of weeks. Of course, the state public purchase law is 31.713 of the Mississippi Code, and if a bid is under 5,000, you don't have to get 2 quotes. If it's between 5,000 and 50,000, then you need 2 quotes. And if the project is over 50,000, then you have to advertise for sealed bids. And this one particular contractor had $150 some odd thousand dollars. Is that right? 120,000 in work on this building, and there were never any sealed bids, best we could tell. So the suspicion was, well, maybe they split it up so as to avoid the requirement and the time delays associated with bidding. We did hear from an engineer with J5, Darrell Winters, last night, and he had a lot of explanations for why it was done the way it was done, and they seem reasonable to me. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a builder, but I have defended architects and construction companies in litigation, so I'm not completely ignorant about it. And there were apparently several changes during the project, one being they increased the occupant load, and when they did that, then they needed to put a firewall in to separate 2 parts of the building. That wasn't contemplated at the outset, so they wouldn't have known that when they got the quotes the first time. And then there were other changes, a vent hood, because they got a bigger stove than they originally thought they were going to get, and some other modifications to the project. I think they had an architect design a facade that was pretty fancy, and in an effort to make it less expensive and perhaps just simpler, they decided not to go with the architect's rendering and went with a much simpler thing. So we had a lot of explanations that make sense as to why it might not have been advertised for sealed bid. But given February 18, February 29, March 17, March 31, different components that were totaled up over 50,000, that certainly had a suspicious look to it.
That engineer, he was with the contractor? What was the contractor that he was with?
He's J5, or the city's project manager.
Okay.
The city served as its own general contractor on the project, so that's certainly legal under Mississippi law, but you still have to follow the public purchase law. And so J5 was acting as the city's supervisor, for lack of a better word, of construction. And they were, soliciting the bids and bringing it back to the city for who was the lowest and best bidder to use.
Last question. So that $250,000, was that, if, let's say, that that reimbursement had taken place, would that have been specifically for Parks and Recreation, or would it have gone back in the general city fund?
It would have been reimbursed the city for the expenses that it made at Scott. So I think when we got reimbursed, there'd be no strings attached. Gotcha. It would have already been spent on the park there.
Gotcha. So, but it would have been the city the city as a whole would have been receiving the reimbursement.
That's right.
Who was the contractor that the $120,000 went to?
Precision Metal Building, Shirley Thompson.
Out of Tupelo?
Columbus, I think. Reed Metal Building sold us the steel. and
Oh,
they're
okay.
out of Tupelo.
Thank you.
That's all, nobody has any other questions?
That letter that you said, that you had mentioned, that detailing what could be looked at in the audit, is that something we could get a look at?
Yes, I've got the documents, I mean, the memo from, yes, from
Yeah.
Wanda Holly. I do have copies for y'all to take.
Appreciate it. Perfect. That's it for me.
Is that it?
That's it.
Thank y'all very much for being here.
Did you want to mention the drug MOU?
Yes, you can say that real quick. That was good news actually too. We talked about this last night are we still up, Joe?
Yes, sir, you're still on.
Jeff, if you'll report on that too, that's a very good news.
Corky Smith with Sims and Sims was approved by the city council maybe a year and a half ago to represent the city in a class action lawsuit against the pharmaceutical supply chain over the opioid epidemic, I would call it. And I remember a few years ago we had a presentation from some people from what's the state drug enforcement?
MBN.
MBN.
Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics.
I'm drawing a blank on that. But anyway, they pointed out that the people dying from opioid overdoses throughout the country was like a 747 fully loaded crashing every 3 or 4 months, and how horrendous it is that there had been no effort on the federal government part like they would if it was a plane crash. But anyhow, I guess a lot of lawyers got together and decided it'd be good to pursue this, and so the city of Columbus, the city of Starkville, Caledonia, I don't know who all else, but a lot of cities across the state signed up in the class action. And amazingly, we got an email from Corky Smith, and I say amazingly because so many times you see a class action suit where the lawyers make a good deal of money, and like, for example, a Ford F-150 with a gas tank problem, you get a certificate to trade it in for a better truck. But here, millions of dollars are being offered to the state, and the city of Columbus is in a good position to get, as I understand it, after attorney's fees and everything, $215,000, and this is only from one defendant, and it's anticipated there'll be more money coming from other defendants. Some cities got huge sums of money. Gulfport got over $2 million. I don't really understand how that could be, but anyway, the state is going to get 70% of the money, and it's going for opioid and addiction treatment, and then 15% will go to the state general fund, and 15% will go to cities and counties. And so we're just really, it's my sense that we're really excited, first of all, to see some attention being paid to getting people well that are addicted, and then secondly, we need the money, so we'll take it.
And that $215,000, that's the net?
That's my understanding, is that the attorney's fees will not come out of that.
You said that's after fees and everything.
That's my understanding, yes.
Letter.
Okay, I think